Good morning and welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy and Mike. Good morning. How's it going,
Oh
Tommy?
my gosh, good morning. I am so stoked about today.
So the topic or just in general because it's like a Tuesday and it's a great day to be a Tuesday.
It's always a great day to be Tuesday when we do the podcast, but especially our topic.
True. This is one of the only highlights of my Tuesdays. After this, it's all downhill. No,
Same.
I'm just teasing. That's not that bad. Tuesdays aren't that bad. Let's we don't really have any other kind of news or announcements of things. If anyone has any topics or news things around, we looked at the Power BI blog, the Fabric blog. Wasn't a whole lot of extra things coming out, but I mean we have a kind of a little bit of an opener here. But before we get into that, let's talk about our main topic for today. Our main topic is going to be Dataflows Gen 1 and comparing that to kind of Fabric SQL for reference tables. Reference tables are these things that are kind of like smaller. They're kind of supporting either data loading processes or they're setting configurations up for your pipelines or process things, something that you might use inside your data models. Smaller tables that kind of support and supplement your main data model. So where should we put these things now? Do we change where we land our data? Is it different now that we have a proper SQL database inside Fabric? So we'll unpack that a little bit, talk a little bit more about our experiences with SQL Server so far inside Fabric, and that'll be our main topic. All right, Tommy, let's go do a quick little opener here. I'm going to open up a little topic here. So I've been doing a little bit more training here in the recent days. I'm curious where your training is. What do you feel like the blend of companies or customers asking about Fabric versus Power BI training? Where do you feel like that's going right now for you? Or do you in general just feel like it's ramping up? I'm kind of
That's
curious.
a great question. And because you and I have been doing training for a while, I've been a full-time trainer for the past 3 years and did it on the side for a while. And you're this very, very similar in terms of just doing Power BI training. Yeah, honestly, if I looked at the trend for me, I'm getting more requests for Power BI. I'm still doing dashboard in a day. Like
Mhm.
it's not like it's going out of style or
Sure.
like it's not going out of style. So
Yeah.
that's a
It's still pretty
huge thing.
popular.
Really popular is still straight Power BI training, general training for people migrating to Power BI. We're still doing advanced training around data modeling or semantic modeling,
Sure.
and still DAX. Like if you were to say the three top things, it's semantic modeling, DAX, and dashboard in a day.
I would say DAX is probably by far the most um, engaging part of the topics that we work on. I mean, it feels like I do a lot of online training as well and videos
Yeah.
on free on YouTube. I would say the ones that get the most engagement are all around DAX topics for me. So anything that's DAX related seems to get a lot of hits. People are really interested in learning more about it. I would also probably argue like DAX is easy to start, but it's difficult to master. So like you need extra training around how to work with it, how to get better at it. So I feel like that's very relevant. I would say this for me. I think a lot of my training still centers around Power BI related things. I am now adding a lot more flavor of what Fabric is. More often, I feel like customers are using Power BI for their general reporting for most of their organization, and they're starting to explore what does it mean to do Fabric. What should I know around Fabric? And I'm finding more around instead of doing pure training on Fabric, it's more like we have a project we think we might fit Fabric.
Yeah.
We need some guidance to make sure that we're doing it right. So it's less about training, but
Yeah.
it's more like on the job, like project building. But a small like we need someone just to kind of advise us. Are we doing this right? Is this something we can actually do inside Fabric? So
That's a
very
good way to put it.
yeah, I
Uh,
mean, it doesn't feel like a pure training because people are like, yeah, training's interesting, but like, why would I want to go connect to random like the New York taxi data thing? Like, interesting, yes. Can I use a notebook? Fine, but I think more companies are interested in if I'm going to spend the money on investing in something to learn, let's learn on a very small project and spend the money on the training of that or a consultant to help us come do that. Oh, and by the way, here are the people that are going to learn this stuff, and they're going to learn how to use notebooks and how to use lake houses and what does the structure look like there. I think that's part of the education that I think is coming along right now.
If there are two pools, the Power BI pool and the Fabric pool. Right now, everyone's still helping how to swim, how to do a backstroke in the Power BI pool. What I'm getting asked to help in the Fabric pool is how cold is it? if I put a foot inside of it. It's very much like a lot of companies are putting a foot in the water, but they're not ready to just simply dive in and learn how to
Hmm.
swim in the fabric pool.
I'm hearing your analogy. I hear your analogy, and I will raise you one analogy.
Oh, I like analogy. Yeah, let's go.
I feel like Power BI is the pool, and Fabric is the hot tub.
Fabric's not, I think I'm going to say the ocean.
There's a
The
lot less
hot
people.
tub.
There's a lot less people in it.
This is very true. Yeah, this is the selective. This is the one for the when they change out the water. It's like, okay, playtime's over. This
Yeah,
is now the exercise pool time.
Adult Swim. It's Adult Swim.
Adult Swim. Yeah, Fabric's Adult Swim. The one thing that's actually probably changed the most is not so much the content, interestingly enough, it's the persona. It's the type of
The
people that I'm actually
persona.
being trained.
Interesting. Okay,
So
keep
when
going.
I first started training, obviously it was all business intelligence people. That was their full-time job. They got paid to do Power BI or were going to get paid to do Power BI. I'm getting a lot more and more requests for the managed self-service side of training, where we already have a Power BI shop, but our team is going to be building reports and building report level measures. We're not going to be doing as much as the semantic modeling, but we're more around the business side, kind of that liaison, that middle hybrid role, rather than a
Mhm.
dedicated business intelligence. That's what's changed.
Mm. Yeah, I think you're right. I think I would also agree. I think the people that we're talking to more of is this is where this is. I call it like a spectrum of like
Mm,
things that you know, right? So there's definitely people that are pure analyst, people doing data analyst or data analytics, and then there's like data engineering. And data
yeah,
engineering would be much more on this, heavy tooling, a lot more code, looking at tables and producing tables of data. And I think between data modeling fits, I feel like somewhere in the middle between these two personas. And so as you kind of look at the spectrum of analyst to pure data engineer, the lines are continue for me blurring because the tooling, I guess I would say this is traditionally the tools would define the role, right? It was a
mm,
SQL
mm,
server and you're a DBA,
right.
data engineering, right? Or, that's the role that you play. You're, um, you're using, business objects and you're taking dimensions and measures and facts or dimensions and putting them together, making tables or visuals of data. That means you're clearly in the analyst side. So that line was very like clear because what you had access in the tool was the only thing you had access to. You can only do
Right.
that part of the job. I think what's happening now is the idea is more people are having access to other parts of the tool that are less required to make sure you're only the data engineer, you're only the analyst. There's more variation. So I'm seeing,
I, yeah.
does that make sense? Like I'm trying to say it's got more of like a gradient now than just pure black and white.
And I think too, if I had to put a prediction, I think we're going to see in the next 12 to 16 months, 12 to 18 months, fabric training because it's kind of be forced in a lot of organizations. We're still at a point right now where fabric is completely optional for an organization to purchase, right? From a licensing point of view. I believe in April, the premium capacity is going away, the ability to purchase it. And the only thing you're going to be able to purchase is the fabric capacity.
Well, let's be clear about your. I'm going to be a little bit more
Yeah.
refined about your comment.
Yeah.
Yes, some premium SKUs are going away, but not premium in general. Like you said, premium's going away.
Yeah. The
Let's be
ability to
clear.
purchase.
Yeah, it's like the P SKUs, the EM SKUs, the A SKUs, they're going to not be as attractive anymore. And you're only going to be able to and want to purchase the F SKU moving forward. So
Right.
F SKUs do everything. It does embedding from
Mhm.
F2 all the way up to the highest SKU you have. It can be paused, started, and stopped. It can be ramped up and ramped down in the middle of the month. Like all these other things that are around the F SKU, it's a lot more flexible than the previous Power BI SKUs that they've been
Right.
building. So it's not that premium's going away.
No, no, no.
You're still
Yeah.
going to have premium per user. And I think what you were talking about, Tommy, in April was you may have been alluding to the price increase that's coming in April as well. So a pro user goes from 10 to 14.
Mhm.
A premium per user goes from $20 to $24 US. So there's a $4 price
Well,
increase coming for both licenses coming as
yeah.
well, which may start having companies really step back and say, do we really need this? Are we going to take that price increase, or we need to figure out another way
Mhm.
to use our Power BI environment?
Right. And I believe, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, if I want to purchase premium after April, I'm basically purchasing a fabric capacity at that point.
Yeah,
I
there's some
yeah,
weird like edge case things. I think like if you already own a premium and you want to
you can
extend it
get
a little
your
bit
money.
longer, that might let you a little bit more. But like you physically, if you were a customer who doesn't have it, I don't think you can already purchase it now. I think it's already blocked. You can't even get it
Right.
today. So unless you can renew up to a certain part, and then they're going to say nope, you have to move over to Fabric. So I'm actually hearing organizations now planning um, a lot of work around, hey, we need to migrate one SKU to the other. We need to make sure everything's going to work in the new world that we're
Yeah.
going to be building. And right, we're only interested in using Power BI. We're not interested in using Fabric yet. We need to buy this Fabric SKU. How do we turn off the Fabric things so that we
Right.
don't let people, because it's going to be more
So
discoverable.
you've heard that, really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, I mean,
Okay.
they're a
Yeah.
Power BI shop, right? If they're paying for Fabric, they're like, well, we're using Power BI. I don't want to consume extra
Mm,
capacity because we're still just Power BI. We're not sure yet if we're going to use Fabric at this point, or they have other processes. I mean, there's companies out there who have already built things in Databricks. Like
yeah.
there's a lot of things they don't need in Fabric
Yeah.
because they've got it somewhere else. I mean, that's okay. That's exactly they play well together. That kind of stuff.
That's fine that people say that now, but that's not how behavior works. As soon as you open that up and it's available, people are going to start playing around with it once those options are actually available on the
Agree.
screen. That's just behavior.
But that's just my point, though. My point
Mm,
is, where organizations are looking to say, look, we have to go to the Fabric SKU, but we need to limit access to who can build things in Fabric
yeah.
officially, right? So there is the ability to turn that off. You can
Yeah.
disallow people from creating Fabric. So it's more around it's it's been a bit sneaky, I would say, from Microsoft. And I think to their point, to their credit, right? They want you to consume more, they want you to explore more. I think from their perspective, if I was Microsoft, look, we've built all these other great new tools that you can use at your disposal. These can make your life easier in a lot of different ways. We want to make sure that people can easily discover them and use them. From their perspective, they're trying to help you out. They're trying to give you better tools. I think from the organization standpoint, not all organizations are willing to take that big a step, and they want more of a centrally controlled, slower rollout of those things to get
Yeah.
into fabric items.
I
So
feel the words that you're saying right now were just as true 10 years ago when Power BI Premium came out. Like, organizations are not ready for Power BI in an enterprise setting. And I think that's just companies in general. They're always going to be more fearful of these advanced technology breaks. I mean, I was having conversations with this, geez, like I feel like in 2020, 2019, on organizations going, this premium, that's a big leap. That's a big jump for us right now because we like Power BI Pro.
yeah.
And this is always how organizations are going to go.
Well, I think again, it's this story of like balancing the value, the cost, right?
Mm,
And I think right now, even at $14 a person, Power BI Pro is still a great deal for a lot of people.
yeah,
And then if you like think about the scenarios of when you're going to use Fabric, and if you can build better models, more efficient models, your model stays smaller. You can actually stay on those lower, smaller FSQs for certain things. If your organization has lots of big data, huge tables, you're probably not going to get away from using a small Fabric SKU to host those models. However, if you're a medium to small size business, those smaller FSQs are amazing. I'm using an F2 SKU for my organization and my reporting. I have small data. It
yeah,
runs every night. I have a SQL server that runs when it needs to. I have data loading from APIs every night and multiple times per day. It does just fine for what I need. And with an F2, I can embed it into other applications. And so this is one of my points that I'm thinking about here is as I unpack what's happening with the price increases, I think more organizations need to really seriously look at is embedding something you want to do to bring your average cost per user down. I think you really need to take a detailed look at internally to your organization. What do people actually do? What do your users need from your reporting? Do you have a large amount of people that are just consuming, creating reports? Or do you have a lot of people creating reports and doing their own data modeling and loading all their information in? So, depending on what you have in your organization, if you can characterize what your users are doing and if you could centralize or limit the amount of people who actually need access to PowerBI.com, you actually could save a lot of money by moving over to an embedded experience.
yeah,
And this is one of the reasons why I offer an embedded accelerator to
right.
help users and companies save money on a price per user experience.
Well, and the fact too is the to your point, the embedded situations, it's not a foreign concept anymore where
Correct.
we have to go off track A proof of concept is much easier to try now.
Yes, I would agree. Yeah. Anyways, all that to say, good things. I'm excited about where they're going with things. I think Fabric is going to be the way to go moving forward. And I think they've made it many entry points to prices that are going to allow you to do a lot of starting with Fabric. The value, I think, is there. The amount of stuff you can do, even at an F2 level, I can make notebooks, call APIs, load data to a lakehouse, like all this stuff really makes a lot of sense to me. So, anyways,
I think when we revisit this at episode 500, I think we're going to see a lot more Fabric training on our books.
I would agree with you there. I think you're going to see a lot more of it moving forward. But again, I think as we go from report builder down to data engineer, the audience does, I think, get smaller and smaller and smaller as you go from that wide audience. And I think that's one of the reasons why Power BI has been such a great adoption is there's so many people who need to build reports, just get data together. Like that's a huge audience. But the more we get down towards the data engineering team, it's going to be less and less people. So I do think it's going to be a smaller funnel. But I do think I think there will be more requests for it.
You're making a point here that I will save for another episode about the data engineer side of it, where I'm really more and more, and I don't want to go too far off topic with this in the parking lot, but I'm leaning more and more that really Fabric's going to be for the business. And I think that data engineer, even title, people don't even know, you need to know that that's what they're doing, but that's going to be exactly what they're doing.
Okay.
It's just too easy for that, but we'll save that.
Okay. Sounds good.
No.
All right, let's go into our main topic for today. So, Tommy, frame us out here. Dataflows Gen 1 versus Fabric SQL databases for a reference table. What do you think we're going to go with this?
I cannot wait to talk about this. This is actually something I've been wanting to have a conversation for a while. So we'll back up a little. Dataflows Gen 1, if you remember, came out in 2017, and it was simply the ability to store data in a table that you could reference in a Power BI report. It worked like a SharePoint list. It was just another connector. Now, what a lot of companies, and my own organization included, utilize reference tables for, or data flows for, were the things called reference tables. We're simply a master list of my dimensions and attributes. I had all my customers listed. I had all the sales territories listed. It was basically the transformations that you had to reuse multiple times. If you recall, before data flows, if you were a Power BI shop and you had a query or dimension that you had to transform in Power Query, the only way you could reuse that was saving that Power Query, that .m file somewhere, and going, oh, just go here if you need that reference table. And especially if it had a lot of steps to it, well, then you had a lot of queries. It was a lot of upkeep going from report to report. Large organizations, more well-cultured, data-cultured organizations have these reference tables, usually in SQL databases, controlled by data engineers. But the problem with that is any changes you need to make, especially if you're dealing with sales teams and territories, it needs to be updated rapidly, which is where the Dataflows Gen 1 came into, because now I could do these transformations, connect to all of my different sources, and create a master list of whatever my reference tables were. An easy one was a dim date table. If my organization didn't have a dim date table and I wanted to reuse the same one, I could store this in a Dataflow Gen 1. But again, I found myself and a ton of other organizations utilize Gen 1 for all of their references, especially if their data engineering team did not have the upkeep or even just those reference tables mastered in a SQL database. This was kind of the way for a lot of organizations. And now we'll fast forward to Fabric SQL databases coming out, which allow us, unlike Gen 1, which was kind of the end goal, once you created a Dataflow Gen 1, the only place you could connect to it was a Power BI model. We now have SQL databases in Fabric, which is kind of the preferred way to keep your reference tables. It's the preferred way you have your attributes and your dimensions stored. So that leads us to the question now, do we focus for, and specifically for reference tables? I think that's the context for our conversation today. Do we specifically focus on utilizing these SQL databases for reference tables? Or do Gen 1 data flows still have a major part to play?
Yeah, let's unpack some of this. So there's a lot of things I think that you're reviewing here, Tommy. So one is, let me unpack a bit of like the Dataflows Gen 1 scenario. And I'm going to actually maybe give you some alternatives here that may also be interesting. We'll see how this goes. Anyways, let's unpack this a bit. So Dataflows Gen 1, that was really like the ripping out of Power Query out of the semantic model and
The
saying,
very first time.
we could separate the data engineering away from the actual semantic model, do it somewhere else. And I would also argue like the Lakehouse, Dataflows Gen 2, all the new other data engineering tools we have now in Fabric does the same thing, right? Here, we're going to prepare a bunch of tables up front before you get to Power BI. Oh, and by the way, the semantic model can be a direct lake model, like just point at the lake tables, and then that becomes your semantic model. And I will admit, I've got a couple semantic models that are used occasionally that are now doing direct lake. Those first loads into the direct lake model are a little bit slower. It does take a little bit of time to like load those initial tables, that very first render, but once it's up and rendering, I've seen the speed of the report being very quick. So sometimes it takes a little bit for that first render of the report to get going. Then after that, it runs very smoothly. I've had a really good performance from my small data sets that I'm doing personally about this stuff. So I think that's where I want to start with just that point there, right? So SQL database. So now and then you went into a kind of a topic around like dimensions. Where do the dimensions sit?
Yeah.
And I think dimensions are a bit interesting because those are the potential common elements you would want to reuse across different semantic models. And so that's where the data flows would come into play here.
100%.
And data flows were interesting because you could use them for free. They would store data in the cloud for free. This is where all this gets really nice to me because Dataflows Gen 1 would just make CSV files behind the scene, load the data in, drop it down as a CSV file, and then you could pick it up and then read it with other things after the fact. The other part too, I think you're talking about, Tommy, is if you don't want to beat up your backend SQL server or your backend systems, if you're pulling from production, the data flow would go read the data once, pull it in, and once the data is read in, it's done. No more. You don't have to go back continually back to the source system over and over again. So I think that's another reason why we would use those things. I wanted to provide some context there around that part before I went into like SQL database thing. Let me just say this. I'm pleasantly surprised with how the capacity units, the CUs, are used from the SQL Server. So when I started playing with SQL Server, I thought, oh no, this is going to be one of these, like we're turning on a physical server. It's going to be like on all the time. We're spinning up hardware. It's going to be this thing that's going to always exist. When I looked into it and actually started running the SQL Server inside Fabric, it doesn't appear to be that way. It appears to act like a Spark session to some degree. It turns on, you run your queries like you need to. It scales up and uses more CU if needed be, if you're running a lot of queries. So it seems to scale up a little bit. And then when it's done, after a period of time of not touching the SQL database, it turns off. Like it goes away. It goes to sleep, and you're no longer charged any more compute units for the SQL database. So Tommy, to your point, right? I had a lot of pain in my mind around if I was going to spin up a SQL server. Traditionally in early Power BI, I would go find an Azure SQL server, turn it on. It would be on all the time, and I would load my tables to that SQL server, and then I would load from SQL server directly to Power BI. Seemed very redundant because I needed like 2 hours in the morning to have the server on, and I was paying for the server for 24 hours a day. I didn't like that experience, honestly. And I feel like this new Fabric experience is not that way at all.
And let me make a very important note to what you said. That's even if you, as a Power BI Pro at an organization, had the ability to create a SQL database, much less manage it. Again, most organizations or people who are dedicating themselves to Power BI are not the ones who are managing their SQL databases at the organization. So you didn't have that crossover of permissions or credentials to do both. You were very much one or the other.
I agree. And that's kind of like my, this is where things get a bit more interesting. This is what Microsoft is doing here, right? They're bringing these tools that were traditionally outside of the hands of the business user and giving them these tools that they could easily go touch and use and build. And again, we're bringing that persona of the analyst and the data engineer into the same working area. The effort to make a SQL server is literally search for the word SQL, click the button, and it appears. Like Like
Mhm.
friction, like no, that friction is gone. That's the ease of integration. And oh, by the way, hey, did you want to go use a Dataflow Gen 2 and write data to the SQL database?
Push
You can do
data. Yeah.
that. Like you can, or I want to rip out a data, like I want to use something to go read data from somewhere else and bring it to the SQL server. I could use that in a notebook. Like all the tools are kind of like easily communicating with each other, and there's like lower barriers. If you have access to Enter ID and you have access to the resource, you can kind of talk to it, which makes a ton of
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. And let me be very clear too. I never found great success with Dataflows Gen 1 with fact data when it came to the actual transactional data that was coming in. Because here's the important distinction with Dataflows Gen 1. When I refresh Dataflows Gen 1, I have to schedule that in the service. If I have a model connected to Dataflows Gen 1, let's say I have like 3 of my tables, it's not going to update the data flow itself. Whatever is stored in the data flow at the time of the semantic model refresh is what I get. So fact tables never made a ton of sense, nor did we have a lot of success
Mhm.
with them. But data that was updated maybe once a day, maybe again, like reference data, dimension date, customer accounts, sales territory, anything I'm using as a dimension based table, we found immense success with. And that's where I really want to be clear here. Obviously, we know that SQL Lakehouse is going to make a ton of sense for fact data. I think that there's not much of an argument there. But the fact that I can store that data in Dataflows Gen 1, and again, I can manage it. Like my team could run and manage this business intelligence based dimension data. Even if this may be reused across other teams, this was integral for any Power BI report or model that we had and reused the same dimensions over across in reports. This was a huge hurdle for a lot of teams before because, again, if you want to get the same sales team based on the same country or zip code, well, again, he was either reusing the same M code, but that's where Dataflows Gen 1 came into
Mhm.
play. And I think a lot of teams maybe they relied on a SQL, their DBA team for this, if they had that. But again, a lot of teams we found were very dynamic. It had to be updated closer. So either you had to have a good change management in place to get to your DBAs, to get them to approve the request and to make that request all in time before a certain deadline, or you fell into a lot of trouble. So this is where I still find Dataflows Gen 1 have a huge part to play here.
Yeah, I mean, I do think so. I don't really love. I mean, there's some things I think that are downsides. I'm not really in love with either Gen 1 or Gen 2. Both of these two kind of, yeah,
Really?
there's just little things, or there's little kind of, death by a thousand cuts kind of things that I'm like, I'm not sure if I'm loving it. And I think that's also because I have really worked on me and my team to really focus on like learning like Python and notebooks. Super powerful. And I'm also finding, I was actually just playing with yesterday, which is awesome, by the way. You can use VS Code to connect a notebook. So, notebook in the service. You can use a button that says open in VS Code. You can open in the web or you can open locally.
Yeah.
If you open locally, you can use GitHub Copilot for free. And with GitHub Copilot, you can just start using a Copilot right next to all of your code. Hey, write me a function that does this. Hey, this is my response. Parse this out in this way from JSON. It does. I mean, the amount of help the code can like the AI can provide you in code assistance is incredible. So no one should really be afraid of Python anymore or writing code anymore, because it's the co-pilots are learn how to use that, learn how to use those tools, and your knowledge gaps in how you syntactically write code can pretty much disappear. You can just talk to the AI agent and it will just give you the answers that you need. So that one I'm really looking forward to. But let me go back to your comment around Dataflows Gen
Yeah.
1, right? I like the idea here. I like the idea of reusing things. I think when you were talking, I had this idea of when we had the SQL DBA and SQL servers, we really needed a good definition as to what the data would look like. What was the data coming in as,
Another great
and
point.
what was the data output going to look like? Every project I've ever been on for anything data engineering or any Power BI project, everyone tells me, oh, the data's in good shape. It's clean. It's got everything we need in it. It's all ready to go. Never have I ever been on any project that has had clean data
Never.
ready to go in the way that a semantic model would need it. right? So data is there. It is in maybe like a fact and dimension kind of experience, but there's what happens when people start asking, I want to calculate this about the model. One, there's not enough fact tables. Two, there's usually the wrong granularity on two different fact tables, which doesn't help me. And then there's also people trying to like do too much in the fact table, and there's not enough being pulled out to the dimensions. So every project has been, let's really talk about what patterns are you trying to compute on? What is the output of the report? Because we always need to shape the data. So my point here is,
Yeah.
anytime you brought in these older projects, in order to have a SQL DBA, give them requirements of the table needs to look like this. It took a little bit of time to get there. And a lot of times, and our analysts don't know what the table structure should look like. We don't know yet. We're still trying to figure things out. I don't know the data well enough to be like, oh, we need to filter this stuff out and drop these columns and pull this in, pull that. I just know there's a table, and I'm trying to figure out on the other side of that table, how do I make value from it? What does my leadership need to talk about to get those reports done? Only after have I played with the data a bit, then I can say, okay, I've now built a Power Query that shapes the data, and now we have it ready to go for reporting.
You're giving me tales from the
Right?
trenches, man. Oh
So
man.
to me, like the whole Power and my story when I started talking about Power BI before anything Fabric came out, my whole story was, look, Power Query is this amazing tool that bridges the gap between a business analyst and a DBA. That was the tool, because I could then click on things, I could manipulate the data, shape it around, do all the things. And one of my main talking points in my class is work hard on automating, work hard on learning how to use Power Query to do things. Okay. All that, I'm going to pause there. I know I said a lot of things there. Reactions, Tommy?
Yeah. Like I said, well, you're giving me a little, like I said, tales from the trenches. Where I'm like, ooh, because you're just reminding me of stories of, hey, we need a dimension table. Oh, we have it, but again, it needs to your point, and a major point here. A lot of organizations or DBAs, it may be in a format for them, but not in the right format for a semantic model,
Correct.
for a tabular model in
It's a
Power
little
BI with
different.
right granularity. And just as almost as a cruel irony, a lot of our Dataflows Gen 1 for reference tables were off of SQL databases, off of their dimensions, but they had to be combed and manipulated to work with the semantic model. We needed a few extra columns, or we needed to remove, there are a few distincts that we needed to get out of there, but it needed to be combed and transformed in a way to work with the semantic models. But they were coming from the team's SQL databases.
Yes.
So in that irony, and again, but the big win of Dataflows Gen 1 was who owned it. It was the business intelligence team. And usually a lot of times we worked with the business because, again, it was stuff that they owned too. The sales team, again, is a big one, where the sales team may change every quarter on who's your manager or what your quota is. And all this was stored in a Dataflow Gen 1. So you needed rapid change management. You needed constant communication, and I need to be able to change this when I needed to, or when the BI team.
This is really interesting. You're pointing this out now, because this is that scenario you just gave right there. There's a new term that I don't really love, but it's coming out. It's called translytical. So it's transactional analytical systems. So it's transactional systems that are doing analytical things. So there's a lot of language around what this system is, and the idea is exactly what you described, right? Hey, we need like a physical SQL server that is a transactional system, and it needs to be right next to our analytical systems, so we can have, to your point, right? Hey, I need a portal. I need some place where we can go in and make real changes to budgets in real time for multiple people whenever we want, and immediately have those changes being reflected, or very quickly having those changes reflected in my reporting. This scenario gives me the ability to have visuals, or now build a new experience. And Microsoft's even talked about this. They've talked about there's potentially new visuals coming that are going to be built by Microsoft. They're going to enable you to edit data in a report and have that data automatically be sent back to the SQL server, which will then automatically be pushed back into the reporting. So there's been a lot of companies that have been solving this. I'm trying to think of, Power On is one of the companies, which I think got bought out by someone at some point. Power On's been a company. There's been a couple other ones over there as well. They're doing a lot of this real-time analytical things, which is great. I mean, I think it serves a need. We have these needs of being able to enter in budgets, estimates, and things of those natures, and keep them up to date. Yeah. Thanks, Greg. The word here is write back, right? So the write back experience, that's what we're talking about. But I mean, it's funny that we talk about write back because write back is like this concept that's like, you just get it with a SQL server. Like it is, the whole thing is called
Right.
writing back. It's just doing its job. InfoRiver is another good one. Yeah, thanks, Greg. InfoRiver is another company that does write back as well. So that experience now exists, whereas previously we used Dataflows Gen 2, and that whole, we always had to wait for like the Dataflows Gen 1
So,
or 2 to like refresh itself, and then we could then utilize that data somewhere else.
and the problem, and that's a really good point, because I want to say this with all the love in the world for Dataflows Gen 1. And I know I've said this before, but my first true love was Dataflows Gen 1. I remember the day it came out because it was the day after my first daughter was
Mm-hmm.
born. And I remember I was so upset. I was happy because my
Yes.
daughter was born, but I was upset because I was on paternity leave and I couldn't work with Dataflows, and I was so excited to. So I remember it was. I'll just never forget that moment. But the problem with write back. Here's the thing, though. This is where Dataflows Gen 1, and again, I say this with all the love in the world, they fall short. You cannot write back to the final result of a Dataflow Gen 1. It is stored in Power BI. The only place I can connect to it is the semantic model and data marts. But if I'm going to be technical here, but it's read only. I'm not talking to it. Now, the problem, if we want to do that dynamic write back, if we want to say we need to be translytical, well, that's a SQL database.
Mm-hmm.
And now we have the ability for the very first time, Mike, that the BI team can own a SQL database, where if I need to create this app that the business owns, which again, I wish I had this 6 years ago or 7 years ago, where it's like, hey, you own what sales team and their quota, rather than putting in an Excel table that I have to then transform through a Dataflow Gen 1. All you have to do is go to this Power App, which is connected to a Fabric SQL database, and you just manage what the quota is and who the manager is with some nice, pretty drop downs and a number input table. And I don't have to do a ton of transformations, because again, the problem with Dataflows Gen 1 is it's only a read only to Power BI semantic models. There's nothing else I can do to it. I can only write back to the source, which we fall into a lot of traps that way.
I think so. And I think this is, again, what Microsoft is doing here is they're blurring the line between a lot of these traditional systems that we're used to thinking about. And even when they came out with data marts, again, I don't really love data marts, but data marts was this weird blend of like a SQL server, but it also did some modeling. You could write measures, I think, in the data marts thing in the past. So like there's this really weird, like, but if you think about, like, I thought this makes a lot of sense, right? It's a SQL server that's running both analysis services and SQL tables. So it's like it's an engine that can run both elements. This makes a ton of sense to me. So what I will also note here is I mentioned the term translytical. It's actually here in Shunjata is going to be speaking about this at the Microsoft Fabric conference in Las Vegas. So I'll put that here and put here on the session. So if you wanted to learn a little bit more about it and see the description of it, there's actually a session coming in the Microsoft Las Vegas conference around this translytical workload, what that's going to look like. How do you automate things? And again, the description of the topic here is these tasks, the translytical task flow allows you to automate end user actions, updating your records, adding annotations, or even creating powerful workflows that can trigger other actions in other systems. So learn about translytical things. It's this new experience where you can then join real-time stuff with data that you have existing at other places. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, you're totally fine. I think that first was mentioned by Amir at Ignite.
Maybe.
I feel like this is the first time we heard that. So I was sitting
I
next
feel like
to
there should be a better term for
but
this one. I don't feel like I don't like the term.
you and I both know it's going to
It's
stick.
the Microsoft marketing
So
is great. They just do a good job of landing these terms.
we love their marketing. So, but so let me ask you: are you using at all right now Dataflows Gen 1? Any clients internally?
And I'll say this, right? Dataflows Gen 1, I like it. It's good. I just don't like the fact that it's landing tables in a place that I can't see them. I can't touch them. It doesn't go to the lakehouse. Like if Dataflows Gen 1 just wrote even the CSV files that we have in Dataflows Gen 1, I'm all Lakehouse now. So I've pretty much migrated all the way to Dataflows Gen 2. And I've actually migrated away from Dataflows Gen 2 even because I don't like how expensive it is from a CU consumption standpoint. For new users or people that are doing things, if that's what you're comfortable using, go ahead, use it. But there is a threshold of size of models or size of tables where Dataflows Gen 2 starts timing out. It has issues. It can't load stuff. There's some things there. It's not quite as efficient as other compute engines, but it's good. I like using it. So I don't really use Dataflows Gen 1. I will say this, the UI of Dataflows Gen 1 feels dated now. It feels like an old version of Power BI these days. It runs well. It does great. You can still connect everything, but it is getting older. And I don't really love the idea that I have when I run the Dataflow Gen 1, it's creating every single table in there is creating a new table to go grab.
That I can connect.
Right. So
yeah.
I think when I do Dataflows Gen 1, if I'm using them, I'm making Dataflows, like I used to make like 4, 5, 6, 7 tables in Dataflows Gen 1. I don't really do that anymore. If I need data anymore at a Dataflows Gen 1, I'm building less tables in each of my data flows and making them smaller. So I'm trying to do the least amount of tables I need in Dataflows Gen 1. In Dataflows Gen 2, I don't really care because I can have the data flows there, and then I could then tell them where to write the data at the end. And so I could have 10 tables and I only write out 2 tables to some place or location.
Well, the two different purposes, right? Again, Gen 1 is solely based on so I can connect to it in Power BI. That's the main intention of a Dataflow Gen 1. Gen 2 is so I can push the data to SQL, a lakehouse, or a warehouse. Those are the 3 real use cases. I'm not really. Can you use both the systems for different things? Sure, but the main point of them and how they work the most efficiently is one is storing data for a Power BI model. The other is to push the data somewhere.
So I want to pick on your brain here a little bit, Tommy. This is where I want to challenge you a bit.
All right.
So we've been talking about Dataflows Gen 1. I recently have been playing with a little bit. Again, I don't have a ton of experience in this one, but if you have an import model and you have tables that are in that import model, you can turn on the ability for those tables in the import model to be automatically exposed into your lakehouse. I saw you knit your eyebrows there for a second. So for those of you on camera, Tommy gave me a little double take. Yeah. If Tommy was drinking his coffee, he would have done a little spit take here on this one.
It would have been a slight spit take, at least inside.
What are you talking about?
I might have managed it, but yeah.
So you can take an existing import model, and if you turn on allow this data to be accessed from the lakehouse, those existing models, it brings in the data, it's able to read it, but those models can be accessed, or those tables can be accessible through a lakehouse.
Why would I do that?
Well, think of it this way, right? The Dataflows Gen 1 experience is kind of old and antiquated. Those Power BI models that you built previously have maybe you could essentially think of there's a single semantic model that has an import mode that's casually running. It has a handful of dimension tables in it. Well, what if I don't want to reuse those dimension tables and build a whole other? So here's my point. My point is I had a semantic model. I have some dimension models in it. I don't want to rebuild all of the data engineering to go build a Dataflow Gen 1 or Gen 2. Like it's already running. That report runs. It does its job. There's already a handful of dimensions that are there. Why can't I just connect to them and reuse them other places? That's the point of the Dataflows Gen 1. Rip out the Power Query portion, shove it into a common table that you could then reuse in multiple places. This is the same experience, except I don't need to do any of that. I can still stay in my happy place of Power BI desktop. I can build all the things that I want there, publish my model, and then have the model refresh on its cadence. And now I get all those tables by default in a lakehouse that I could then go use other places.
That is so many extra steps. And the feature you're talking about, I know exactly what you're talking about.
What's the name of the feature exactly? I'm going to try to Google that one real quick.
I just remember is push your data to a lakehouse. And those are so many extra steps to have a master source of data, especially if we're talking reference tables here, again, in that context, because I have to first do the Power BI transformations, if there are any. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, that my Power BI model at this point is not connecting to anything in Fabric, or else then we're getting very complicated with lookbacks. I'm just connecting the data, doing transformations, loading this in the model, publishing this, and then pushing that to a lakehouse? Or why would I do all those additional steps? Because if I have to manage or update something, like I have to go to that Power BI file, which to me is completely counterintuitive to a lot of your philosophy around Fabric and
Mm-hmm.
Power BI. Why would I? This is like the gold model, but the old version of a master data set. And again, it's not stored in a tabular format. It's just stored as static data in a lakehouse. This honestly, then the logical point here is I'm pushing my data, Mike. I'm really leaning more and more towards the primary place that I'm going to have dimension based data, especially if I need write back, especially if I need business to manage their data and to own their data in a Fabric SQL database, right? Because it's stored in the format I already want it. If you need to change something from group A to group B, it's incredibly easy to do. It doesn't go through a pipeline. It can just happen. And for those who missed, I just snapped my
Uh-huh.
fingers to show the quickness of
Yes.
that. And it's managed in a single place. I'm your your situation there. I want to actually discover in another episode because I don't know what that feature's primary purpose is for. To take a semantic model and then push into a
Yes.
lake house. And I'm struggling with where that is better than, and where is that feature better than another feature in Fabric right now? What does that do better or solve in a more efficient way than
I think
anything
it's more of
else?
like a backwards compatibility step is how I would look at it, right? It's the idea that you already have semantic models that are running. You've already built the logic into the actual, semantic models themselves. Those tables could be maybe somewhat large. Maybe they're using incremental refresh or bigger
Sure.
things in them, right? If the models are already larger and they're just there, why not reuse the work that you've already done, right? I mean, the alternative would be is understand how that table's built, go build something different or new, right? And I think
Yeah.
maybe also the concept here is if you're already spending the money, let's talk about the money here, right? If you're already spending the money to make one model have some tables in it, why not load that table a second time in a different model? Just reference the original table that was loaded from the original semantic model. So that's where I think this is really interesting to me is you wouldn't need to pay for the loading process twice, essentially. And I think a lot of times we have a lot of models that pay multiple times to load the same data, which is why we went to Dataflows Gen 1 the first time. And now we have lake
Yeah.
houses. Like spend the money to compute the table and put it in the lake house or put it in the Dataflow Gen 1 because you're going to spend money to get there, reuse it now because now I don't have to load the data again. It's already there and ready to go. So like this is another scenario where you're potentially now reusing work that you've already done.
Except any of this dimension reference data is my Indiana Jones gold treasure chest or whatever it's called. The shoot. You're the movie guy. What was it called? The Golden Arcs? Indiana Jones and
Indiana Jones
the
in the McDonald's, like the Golden Arches, the Temple of Doom
shoot.
is what you're saying. Maybe
Temple. No, the one with the is a golden chest kind of
that's
thing.
that's
So
that's the Holy Grail, or the Holy Grail is the cup. The
yeah, this was the
Ark
Ark
of the
of the
Covenant.
Covenant, but I don't remember. I don't remember what the movie was called. Was that Temple? Anyways, was that Temple of Doom?
I'm googling it right now. Keep going.
No.
Raiders of the Lost
Okay.
Ark. That's what it's called.
Anyway,
Raiders,
Indiana. Okay, Raiders of the
Indiana
Lost
Jones,
Ark.
Raiders of the Lost Ark. We are good on movies. We watch a lot of movies.
We are great on
Awesome.
movies. Yeah, I think. Yeah, Harrison Ford. I could tell you that. So, regardless, my dimensions are the arc in this where I have to be very careful. Things don't just rapidly or quickly change without me understanding. This is almost why I understand why Gen 1 had to have that takeover feature. Like, are you sure you want to take over the data flow? Because if you change something, this is going to update a lot of reports. And to your point, with the semantic model pushing to a lake house, well, I mean, someone could go to an old version of the Power BI model, or someone just refresh and make a quick change. And guess what? Everybody's models that are dependent on those reference tables are now updated and changed. And if I have no version history, which we know SQL databases do, we can at least go back in time. Like you have to treat these reference tables as gold they're gold, Jerry, from from Seinfeld. Like, this is your master reference table where quotas, your territories, where countries, your metrics are going to be dependent on these reference tables.
I agree, Tommy, in that regard, but I'm also thinking like you're also thinking very top down, organized, centric away. I'm not sure every department is always
Completely
going to be that
disagree with that.
organized with all their metrics and things that they're doing. It's going to be a little bit more ad hoc-ish, I think, in certain areas. So, like, I mean, I think there's a spectrum. Again, it's kind of like a scale of things, right? So we're maybe talking to more of like those really critical, certified level reporting pieces. Yeah, you're right. You're not going to want to muck around with those data flows too much because they're going to be setting those standards and people are relying on them. People are building things off of those tables. Great, that's what they should be doing.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing it for. But when you get more of like this departmental or individual level, sometimes you just want to have the data there and you just want to reuse it. So I think there's also a part of this around like when you're doing really good dimensional modeling practices. Yes, I agree with you 100%, Tommy. But there's also a world of this is I'm still exploring the data. I've already loaded sales data once. I just want to reference it again somewhere else. Or I've already loaded this once before. How can I easily get that information back out? And maybe it's more of a bubble gum and band-aids solution, right? For now, but you don't. This is the challenge I think I face here a lot. Me personally is how much time do I invest in a solution to make it like just right, or do I invest just enough to get it working to prove that it's valuable, and then I can invest the time to make it better, right? So a lot of this is like I'm trying to build a lot of things quickly. I need to deliver, and this is one of the stories of Power BI. 5x5 was their initial story. In 5 minutes, you'll have what was it? 5x5, 5 minutes to wow or something like that. It was
5 minutes
something
to
like that.
wow, yeah. And clicky,
Yeah.
draggy, drop it. Yeah, we
Show
we
up,
know all the terms.
build something for 5 minutes and say, look, data starts appearing. Like it's not that difficult. So that has been the whole mentality is build something quickly that adds value. Then what comes from that is once you do a lot of that, you have to start really thinking about, okay, not everything that's designed quickly is always efficient. And then we have to start stepping back and saying, what's the efficient way to do everything? So I think there is some discovery that happens in the process of building.
There's definitely discovery, but I'm gonna have to Empire Strikes Back level of disagree or push
This is
back
when
here.
Indiana Jones got on, the moose truck,
The
and they
Death
were
Star.
running away from,
Same
the,
character, same actor.
the Imperial ships that were in space. Yes.
This is after after Harrison Ford defeated the Nazis and then immediately went to Darth Vader. So no, but this is my argument or pushback here. Yeah, exploration, all those things, great, fine. Put that in a dev place. Put that in development. As soon as you're dealing with anything that's dimensional or my reference tables, the problem and the only thing I'm pushing back on is this is a top down approach. You could focus simply on one department. That could be your life as
Sure.
an analyst. But right. But the thing is, those dimensions, if they're not right, your numbers are always wrong. And people, even if it's not KPI or relying, like if you have zip codes wrong, or again, your marketing campaigns wrong, well, at some point, someone's going to figure out that your metrics are wrong, and it's because your dimensions are not right. As soon as you have production level reports, your dimensions have to be defined because someone is going to spot an error. Someone's going to spot this is not right. And it's more or less what I've found. It's not because your DAX is wrong. It's because your dimensions aren't aligned and they're not. And again, I know the word perfect is a terrible word in our business, but at the same token, exploration to me is very different than production. Exploration should absolutely be part of what we're doing. But once we have something in an app, once I have something that the consumers and stakeholders are looking at, well, I have to be able to speak to those dimensions. At the very least, if it's not perfect, if someone asks me why a dimension is the way it is or aligned with something, you better have the ability to speak to it. Why campaign A is tied to whatever whatever dollar amount. And if you can't, that's where you lose
But
trust.
I think Donald is pointing on what you're talking about there is you're talking about what is good conformed dimensions versus not conformed dimensions. This is a Kimball practice that is used by organizations around the world. Very solid, good scenario.
Yeah.
But my point here, though, is not everyone understands, like, I don't think I would come into an organization fully understanding that everyone understands what conformed dimensions are really doing, like how important they are. I agree with you. They are extremely
Mhm.
important. We need to have people talking about this when this is a data culture problem. So we're moving away from the technology here. Where this is all part of
Mhm.
process and people about, do we really understand what a conformed dimension is? Do
Yeah.
we know how to use it? Because once you understand what a really well conformed dimension looks like, we can now talk about multiple fact tables that can be
Right.
used to calculate different things. So I agree with you, Tommy.
Right.
But I think my point here is, not everyone, not the culture in all departments of an organization are going to have that real rich understanding that we do of what conformed dimensions are. And so I think there's just going to be a bit more flexibility here. And that's why I was thinking, maybe Dataflows Gen 2
Mhm.
isn't really what you want. Maybe Dataflows Gen 1 isn't really what you want. Or maybe SQL Server isn't what you want. Maybe what you really want is a model that is loading, importing data every night, and you're
Mhm.
just touching those tables and
Yeah,
using them other places because you can now reach
I
them
got you.
through like this new experience. So all this to say, I'm not sure I've done enough testing around this to say, yes, go build everything like this. This is not what I'm recommending. I would still recommend
I got you.
bring everything to the lake house. That's where you're going to get a lot of your value. And to be honest, Microsoft is spending big bucks with their development team to work only in the model space, anyways. Like, the lake house
Mhm.
space. There's lots of teams working on making that experience premium, top notch, like the best experience you can get. And now you have all these other tools like SQL databases. So anyways, I know we're getting kind of close on time here. We probably should wrap
Yeah.
here for people to get back to their normal daily workflows. But I think this has been a good discussion. I'll just give you my final thoughts. My final thoughts here is, I think um, data flows Gen 1, SQL databases, it doesn't really matter what you choose. I think I'm going to start, me personally, I'm going to start choosing more data flows Gen 2. I'm going to start, because I am a Fabric person. I think the price is right. It does so many more things. I'm going to continually push organizations to start thinking about leveraging a little bit portions of Fabric to help them build better data structures. But I will say this: I've been very pleased with the performance of the SQL Server. There are some missing functions and features that are not there because it's a Fabric flavor of SQL. But overall, I've been very pleased with this compute usage on it. It seems to fill in the gap what I need. I can turn it on an F2 and not worry about it eating all my capacity all at once. So in that regard, I'm really interested to try and play more with it. I've been spinning up a couple. I've been playing with it myself. I'm finding good value from it. I think it makes a lot of sense. And as long as they keep it efficient and costs low, I'm happy with it. It seems like a good solution. Tommy, what are your final thoughts here?
If your only option is Dataflows Gen 1 and you need these reference tables, you're reusing it, it is a very good solution and it still stands up. However, if you are moving to the Fabric world for the very first time in your Power BI life, SQL databases allow you to own these reference tables and can have that collaboration with the business. What I'm imagining here is a perfect world is I'm creating these SQL databases with reference tables and I can have a power app where the business can own this. They can easily do this right back, which has been the greatest problem. If you only have data flows Gen 1, great, they still stand up. But if you have the opportunity to utilize a Fabric SQL database and own your data with the business like never before, that to me is now the primary route that organizations should go.
I'm going to throw down the link here that I found really quick. So the feature I was talking about was called One Lake Integration for Semantic Models. That's the feature I was talking about. The documentation is going to be in the chat window here. If I am ambitious enough, I'll go back and add it to the description as well, so you can find it there additionally. But here is the One Lake integration for semantic models. This is the feature I was talking about. It allows you to basically, if you have a single table that is imported in your semantic model, you can expose that entire table in the lakehouse for other users to use. So you can then bring that Power BI table in, you can have it using import mode, and then once the table's in the lakehouse, you can use other models that are direct lake accessing that same table. So you kind of get the data flows Gen 1 kind of experience where you're bringing tables in to a common place and you can kind of utilize them other places. So really interesting on what that would mean. That also means your imported models could be used in like a Python notebook, or you could load them somewhere else, or like it really. I'm telling you, this thing turns into like a rat's nest potentially of like different connections across all the things that are touching other stuff. Like you could do a lot of crazy things. Again, this is why I think Tommy and I are very pro on being organized and working on your culture, because you can do a lot of things. Not every single thing you would do is useful to the organization or easy to maintain. So you have to make choices as an organization about what you want to build. Anyways, that being said, thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate you being on the podcast. Chat, you've been amazing. A lot of good ideas, a lot of good comments here. So thank you very much for participating in the chat as well. If you like this podcast, if you like what we're talking about, please make sure you subscribe, hit the bell. You'll let us know. We do this every Tuesday and Thursday. So we'd love to have you on and chatting on the conversations as well. If you find this is valuable to you, odds are you know somebody else this would also be valuable to. Please go out to somebody else and let them know you found this amazing podcast that you could want to listen to and learn some more things about Power BI and all the Fabric things that are coming out now. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
You can find us in Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. It helps us out a ton. And please share with a friend. We do this for free. Do you have a question, idea, or a topic that you want us to talk about in a future episode? Head over to powerbi.tips/podcast. Leave your name and a great question. And finally, join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central, and join the conversation on all Power BI Tips social media channels.
Nice. Have a good one, and we'll see you next time.